Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on the Steepest Learning Curve Mental Health for Student Early Career Midwives. My name is Catherine and I work for Doctors in Distress. We are an independent charity providing mental health support to all healthcare workers across the UK, and we run programmes of peer support groups as well as specialist-led webinars such as this one. As I mentioned earlier, please note that this is a recorded session, but you'll be able to remain anonymous if you choose, and only the speakers will be seen. So welcome, and today's webinar will be led by midwife Leah Hazard and final year midwifery student Siobhan Callaghan. There will be time for questions as well, so please do feel free to pop any questions you may have either in the chat and the Q&A, and we will make sure to come to those. But other than that, I hope you really enjoy today's session, and I will now pass over to Leah and Siobhan. Thank you both.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. It's funny, just before we started the chat officially, we were saying, oh, there's over 100 people signed up, but even if we only get 15, that'll be a nice number to have this conversation. It looks like that's what's happened. But that's absolutely fine, and it is quite nice actually to have a more intimate number, so you can all ask questions in the chat if you want to, and be sure that you are heard if not seen. So I'm just going to introduce myself briefly, and then we'll come to the lovely Siobhan. So I'm Leah, and I have been an NHS midwife for just coming up to 11 years now, almost exactly, which is hard to believe. I guess on the theme of today's workshop, like every shift I do, I'm sort of still somewhat surprised that like I'm still doing this and I've made it this far. So every shift counts, every little helps. So in that time, I've worked in a number of different clinical areas for the last few years, mainly triage, but I have worked kind of everywhere, all over, at a large hospital in Scotland. I never say exactly where I work, although some of you probably know anyway. And in that time, I've written a couple of books, which maybe how some of you know me. So Hard Pushed, A Midwife Story was my kind of midwifery memoir that came out in 2019. And most recently, Womb, the inside story of where we all began, probably, yeah, on a shelf here behind me somewhere. And a lot of my work in midwifery, outside of my clinical work, has actually ended up revolving around mental health and supporting people to have mentally healthier careers and more supportive experiences in this role. And it wasn't ever something that I planned. I think when I initially was a student, mental health wasn't even something that I really consciously thought about. That came back to bite me in the bum. And it wasn't really something that was discussed much either. This was back in the dark ages of 2010 to 2013, and we still kind of didn't really have the like mid-soc social network kind of communication that people have now. So we weren't all talking about you know, how to be mentally healthy at work or in training, or how to support yourself or each other, and it showed. But then when I wrote Hard Pushed, I decided, for better for worse, to be really honest and candid in that book about my own personal struggles with dealing with the kind of workload and pressures of midwifery. And it wasn't really something that I initially had planned, but in the end, it seemed to resonate with a lot of midwives and students. And I started getting a lot of contact on social media, sometimes on a daily, even hourly basis, from people saying, you know, I'm struggling too, and this is what I'm dealing with, and I can't really see a way forward. And I guess I became a sort of like unintentional sounding board. And it also made me realize this is a really massive part of our role now, because the role is so complex and the situation is so demanding that we, you know, a lot of us really don't have the tools and the support we need to survive and thrive in this role. So that's been a focus of my work over the last few years as well, doing some workshops for student mid-socs around the country, which some of you may have participated in. And also I've done training. I've done a year-long certificate in counselling skills and a course in birth trauma resolution. So those are tools that I found really helpful to help support students and midwives, with some individual coaching as well. So it's an interest of mine, and along the way I have met Siobhan, who is now a final year student at the University of Western Scotland near me, and we've encountered each other a few times on workshops, placement, bank shifts, which has been absolutely lovely. And I've gotten to know some of the students around Siobhan and her cohort as well. So over to you, Siobhan. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Siobhan, as Leah just said there. I'm a third year midwifery student at UWS, soon to be complete, soon to be newly qualified, which is what makes this a wee bit more poignant, the topic of today's discussion. So I came into midwifery later on in life, as you probably can guess by looking at me, but I was a police officer for 10 years, but I always wanted to be a midwife. Since I was 19, I wanted to be a midwife, but I had a family and these things they took priority at the time. And it's only once my family got older that I was able to commit myself, because I knew that the workload was going to be intense, and I knew that trying to do that with 4 under 5s was just not going to be possible for me. So I came into midwifery incredibly passionate about midwifery and incredibly passionate about supporting physiological birth and trying to reduce birth trauma. Actually, the catalyst for me coming in at this point was the birth of my niece. And my sister-in-law went through a COVID pregnancy, which I'm sure all of you have known someone who's been through a COVID pregnancy, and all the kind of heartache that entails. And she didn't receive any continuity, and she had a birth that she still continues to really struggle with, actually. And I thought, we need to do better. We need to do better, because I was lucky enough to have really good experiences, and I thought someone was able to help me with that, and I want to be that person that helps. So anyway, I came into midwifery, threw myself into it heart and soul, as anybody who knows me will know that, and then accidentally fell into the Midwifery Society. Wasn't my intention to go into the Midwifery Society, but I tend to, a bit like Leah, I tend to find myself in these places, and because supporting the other students around about me was so important. Even from when you first get your place at university, quite often what happens is there's a group chat set up, and everybody's vying for information, like, because nobody knows what's going on, and everybody just wants that wee bit of support, and I'm like an information gatherer. So I was back then going away and finding out the information and come back and sharing it with the students. So by the time we started, in our first week, the other students had said to me that they wanted me to be the student rep for the year, because they felt that I could be their voice. And it's progressed from there, because again, like Leah says, it's not going into the kind of supporting of students isn't something that I particularly planned, but I think it's part of me, is to support people, and that's obviously why I come into midwifery, because supporting women and their families and birthing people and their families is so important. So I think it goes hand in hand, advocacy for both society work and midwifery. Actually, it works really, really well together. As a result, actually, our union are restructuring the whole of UWS union, and it's going to be based on academic societies, with ours as an exemplar, because they've realised actually student-led learning with support that helps people to feel included is the best way forward for unions. So they're working on that in the background. So that, for me, that's me, my kind of legacy leaving university, is to go, like, we did it right. And I'm just passed on in the next couple of weeks to a lovely new committee who are just as passionate and will take it even further than I've been able to. But the core of it always, and we had this kind of meeting last night as we finished, we were like, I love you, you're great. We would pick out each other's, like, the things that they're really good at. Like, you're so good at communicating with that, you're so good at making me feel welcome. Like, these things, and it might seem really small, but actually it's really big. It's really big to be able to walk away and feel like I've made a difference today to one person. So yeah, so that's where I've ended up, as I say, the president of the Midwifery Society. Just passed that on, and I'm going out into the world of hopefully newly qualified midwives soon. And one of the things that we're doing with the Midwifery Society this year is we are going to be extending that to cover all newly qualified midwives for the first year of the training, or the first year of the preceptorship, because I think it's become quite apparent that at the point of leaving university, you've been able to build up this support network, this community of people where you feel like you're safe. You can go back to them and say, and have a event or whatever you need to do. and then going out into newly qualified, find yourself in a new place of work, new colleagues, and like a new employer, it's quite isolating, I think. And I think just having that, taking that society with you, just gives you that you kind of buffer for the first year until you find your feet. So that's our plan moving forward. So so I'm keen for that to develop.
I mean, it's amazing what you've done, Siobhan, like nurturing and kind of consolidating that peer network and now making sure that it continues into your first year, which I think is a kind of sticky wicket, like transition point where we know that a lot of people do end up taking time off on sick with stress, or in fact leaving midwifery altogether, and that's doesn't have to happen. But I'm interested to go back to, if we can, like if you can remember so long ago when you actually started your training. I know for me it was a massive, like I came into it as a mature student as well. I had a previous, albeit somewhat short-lived career in media, and I had 2 young children as well. So I wasn't just like, you know, brand new, completely wet behind the ears. But for me, it was a big, big culture shock going into midwifery, especially going out on placements and things, and also just the general burden of the workload and the level of responsibility for people's well-being and for their lives. And then also over time, the sort of dissonance between wanting to, like you know, going in all guns blazing and wanting to change things and do my best, and then coming up against the reality of like, oh, this is the system I'm actually working in. So for you, I'm interested to hear about, you know, you came in having worked in the police force, and so obviously, again, another high pressure kind of busy job. How was it for you over, let's say, your first kind of year or two, even emotionally? Like, was it challenging in the way that you imagined? Did you find yourself well prepared for the kind of emotional mental health side of things, or did you come up against any kind of bumps that you didn't expect?
I think so. I read your book actually before I came. And I know that you've said this before. I read this book. I can't believe this has inspired people to go into midwifery, because that was not ever your intention.
I know, I always say, sorry, that wasn't the intention.
But it was inspiring. But I think it helps. It actually did really help me. It helped prepare me for what to expect. So from my background, people don't think there's a lot of kind of similarities between police and midwifery, and actually there's lots and lots and lots of similarities, because essentially you're public facing, you're there because you want to help people. You're dealing with the members of the public who are all the same people, you know, so, and the challenges that go with working for a big company organisation are very similar as well. So actually I think I was able to come into it a bit more prepared probably than others. When I went out on my first placement, I think the issue is in first year you get taught about normality. So in first year you get taught all about all the good things and all the things that should be happening, which is great because you need to be taught this at some point. However, the issue with that is the reality out in the workplace is not everything that should be happening, as you well know. So when I went out my first placement, I was kind of aware, oh, this might not quite work out how I thought. But I actually went into a community placement rurally that was exactly, it was the gold standard of midwifery care. So I was like, this is really setting me up for failure here. I knew, I actually did a reflection that was written, I wrote that in the Practice of Midwife journal at that point, because I was like I know that this might go sour at some point. When I went into my first labour ward placement, which was our second placement, then it hit me, because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot that you're doing. And what really struck me at that point was, do I really want to be here? Do I want to do this? And that oh my goodness, the feelings of guilt that came with that, because I'd given up a really good paying job. Everybody in my family had sacrificed a lot for me to be able to be there. And all of a sudden I'm here doing this thing that I've desperately wanted to do for so long. And I'm questioning myself, and I'm like, do I really want to do this? Like, can I do this? Because it seems impossible at that point, because all the things that you need to be able to like physically do and mentally do at the same time, and amongst the shifts, which thankfully I was already doing shifts, so like that wasn't new to me, but still adding that all in and constantly being assessed. And I think that's a big thing throughout your kind of student years. And I think we tend to forget, actually, but the pressure that puts on you, that you are every second of the day, you're being assessed, you're being watched, and you're being judged. That's hard. That's really, really hard. Mentally, actually, it doesn't matter how resilient you might be, like, that's really, really draining. So during that kind of labour ward period, that was when I had probably a bit of a wobble. And thankfully I was surrounded by really good people. Like our year were really good at talking to each other, and then once we kind of started discussing, we realised that we were all feeling the same way. And that kind of validated it and made you feel a wee bit better, because you were like, right, this isn't just me. And I think because, as I said, I went in and I flung myself into it, people just assume that I will breeze through things and it'll be really easy. And I think it was quite nice for some of them to see that I was also having this kind of wobble and this kind of struggle, because they were like, oh, well, if Siobhan's feeling like that, then that makes it a wee bit more normal for me to feel like that. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, so I would say that bit was the kind of hard bit. Then after that, we went out. I think we actually had a wee period of time back in uni, and then we went back out into the third placement. And actually, the third placement for me, it all kind of consolidated. And since then, I've been in spoke to first years every year before they go out in their first placement, and I'll say to them, the way that you feel about going in on Monday, and the fear and the terror and everything you have, and how you think you don't know anything, that versus 6 months down the line, you've done 3 placements, because it's not that long. It feels like a lifetime, but it's not that long. I was like, you'll be a completely different person by the last day of that last placement. Because you'll actually, I think you'll have proven to yourself that you're capable of doing it, and you're capable of this. There's no point in trying to pretend it's not hard, but it's about being able to find the strategies to be able to cope with the hardness. It's a bit like labour. I always bring these analogies back to being in labour and the various points of being in labour. Like, we say that to women, we stand there with women, we're like, we know it's really hard, but you've got it in you, we know that you can do this, and we're here to support you. And that's essentially what my friends in my friend group and kind of latterly the kind of midwifery society did for me. They were the midwife cheering me on, saying that you can do this. So I'd say in first year I had that wobble. I think it gets worse every year, I'm not going to lie. I think for me, mentally, I've had quite a challenging year. My dad passed away this year as well. And although I think there's not really enough time to allow yourself to process that during a really, really busy course. So at the time when that happened, I was like, I need to get this done, because I don't want to be at this stage now thinking I've got so much to catch up on. But over the course of maybe kind of 3-4 months, maybe 5 months, then that kind of started to hit. And that was when I had a complete and utter total crisis of confidence, and I spent a whole week sobbing, just not just about my dad, but actually I didn't get as good a mark as I thought I should have got for an assessment, which seems utterly ridiculous. But for my dad, he was like all about the if it's not 100%, it's nothing kind of thing. So I think and I reflected then, and that's actually what made the difference. I sat down and I reflected, and I was like, why am I feeling like this? What is it that's making me all of a sudden just kind of lose it? So I would say that the reflection is just as vital, actually, when it comes to it, is sit down and think about, like, what is it that's making you feel this way? Because sometimes this career isn't for everybody, and I don't think that's a failure. You know, like, you don't know until you try, and this is not something you can compare. I mean, I'm comparing it to policing, it's similar, but you can't compare it to anything else. So if you get 2-3 years down the line and you go, this just isn't for me, that's not a failure. Like, and it's about looking at the bigger picture and going, right, is it something that I'm struggling with right now and I can work my way through it, or is it a bigger thing altogether? And at that point, you need to just look after yourself, and really kind of listen to yourself. And I'm always saying this to, like, my friends as well, like, show the same compassion to yourself that you show to. What would you say to me? You know, that's what I say to them. See, if you were saying this, what would you say to me? And they're like, oh, right, okay, I would say that. You're like, yeah, exactly. So, you know, take your own advice. I think that you willingly and freely give out, because you'll never get a better cheerleader than a midwife. Like, but also you've got to be conscious of like, say, just knowing yourself and knowing, right, where's the line? Where is the point where I say, no, this the benefits are not outweighing the negatives here.
And that's an ongoing conversation, I think, for all of us, like throughout our careers. I think I'm so glad you brought up that concept of self-compassion, because in my conversations with midwives of all levels, from the most junior students to more experienced senior midwives, even in management and things, I think the one thing that so many of us really struggle with is that sense of self-compassion. That doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. I think especially, you know, the nature of a midwife is to want to help other people, right? And to put their needs in front of her own. So to turn around and say, oh no, you need to have a bit more compassion for yourself, be gentle and kind to yourself, maybe lower your expectations. That's a skill, I think, that needs to be practiced and learned for me as well. And whether that means you're just having a rough day and you need to have a bit more sympathy for yourself in that moment, or whether it means you're thinking about leaving the profession or you're having a real crisis of confidence, it's the same skills that you need to have a bit of perspective on your situation, and also a more realistic idea of what you should expect from yourself. I mean, there's definitely been times, as you know, when I've thought about just leaving midwifery altogether. It could happen at any moment, I'll be completely honest. But I can sort of laugh about that and have a bit of distance from it now, because I wrestled with that for a long time and was really, really hard on myself. And I think I'm at a place now where I realize actually it doesn't affect my worth as a person, whether I'm a midwife today or tomorrow or next year. Like you say, it's such a weird, unusual, challenging job that every shift you do, or every time you turn up for placement or lecture you go, really counts for something. And I often say to people, you know, most people out there on the street, although they may be lovely people, would not have the balls or the ovaries to turn up, put on those scrubs, tie up those skanky trainers, go onto that ward or that clinic, or, you know, out in community or whatever, and not even do what you do, but see what you see. Like, most people just would like about face and leave, and that is absolutely a normal human response. So to even like voluntarily put ourselves in this environment, in this role, like day after day after day, counts for a lot. Never mind to meet, you know, a basic standard of care where you're keeping people alive and safe. Never mind maybe even meeting a higher standard of care where people are safe and alive and happy and empowered and, you know, all the rest of it. So I think we're really bad at like recognizing how challenging all of those little steps are, and having like giving ourselves grace for that.
I think one of the strategies that someone showed me, actually just before I came onto this course, was it was a meditation, and people will maybe go, oh, that's a bit kind of hippy dippy, but actually meditation works. It really does, and you can do meditation in various ways. So for me, meditating generally is reading. I can just read, and then I go into that space where I'm not part of this world and I'm part of the world of book, and that's it, and that's fine. It's actually got really good. There's research out there that says that if you read like non-fiction, like it reduces your stress levels by like something 76%. It's like
Yeah, it
ridiculous.
lowers your
Like,
blood pressure and things. Yeah.
does everything for you. So like it doesn't have to be kind of sitting your kind of typical what you might imagine meditation to be. However, this one specifically was that type of meditation. It was kind of eye shut, like thinking, and we were going through like imagery, and the imagery was about having your inner child, and it was imagining yourself as a 2 or a 3 or a 4-year-old, and then coming to yourself as an adult and placing that wee person on your knee and talking to them with the compassion that you would like to that child, as you would with any child, you know, giving them a hug, making them feel better. And for that, I've always come back to that, because that inner child is me. So that wee 4-year-old me, I'm saying it's okay, don't worry, it's all right, it's going to be all right. Like, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry. Nothing that you do right now defines you as a person. It defines the moment you're in, maybe, but it doesn't define you as a person. Like you said, like I wrote a piece just actually this month for the Student Midwife Journal, and it was about taking time to kind of just listen to yourself and give yourself a wee bit of space. But what I'd said in that was that you want to, oh sorry, I forget now, that's terrible. But anyway, it was about like just looking after yourself and you not being just a student midwife. You are so much more than just a student midwife. You're so much more than just a mother, than just, your whole person is about a bigger picture than just one small aspect of it. And I think as student midwives, that's what we tend to do. We forget that we're anything else. We just remember that we're a student midwife and beat ourselves up with being a student midwife. And particularly to be a student, like the whole, it's in the name. You're a student. You're not supposed to be a master. You're not meant to know all. You're not meant to be perfect at everything. So it's completely unrealistic to put that pressure on yourself, because we've got plenty of time. Like, time is the thing that will happen. Over time, we become experienced, and I know midwives who have been doing the job for 30 years and are still like, oh, never seen that before. That's new. So like, we learn all the time. So we're always going to be a learner, and as we're always learning, never really going to be the master, then we can't be hard upon ourselves for not knowing everything and not being able to do absolutely everything. So, but yeah, I think it's important not to just tar ourselves with this, like, this is the one person that I am, and then that's it. I think we need to forgive ourselves, and as I say, going back to that meditation, I go back to when I'm beating myself up. I go back to, would I beat that wee 4-year-old up? Would I be telling them that they're bad and they're wrong and they're thing? No, I wouldn't. But that wee 4-year-old is me. Like, so why would I do that to myself? So that's how I manage the self-compassion thing. Because, like you say, it's learned. It's really difficult. It's really difficult, and I have to actually force myself to do it. But that's the way that I manage that. And everybody will have different ways of doing it, but that's how it was effective for me, because it's really hard to just say that you'll do.
Yeah, it's absolutely a skill, and everybody is a different type of learner. Everybody will be able to sort of hone that skill in a different way. There are lots of great meditations and kind of visualizations you can get on your phone for free if you even just type in self-compassion or connecting with yourself or whatever, if you are that type of person that likes to do that. Some other strategies that have come up in my work with people individually are things like making sure you keep a file of like any kind of praise you receive or anything that you think of as positive or an achievement, either on placement or just in your work. So something I recommend to people sometimes is like, I know students are great fans of keeping little tiny notepads in their pockets. I still have mine from when I was training. But something that's nice and takes very little time at the end of the shift when you're absolutely knackered is just write down, maybe 2 or 3, or even just one, if there just is one, positive thing that happened on your shift, even if it was just something like, I made myself a nice cup of tea on my break. Like, even if the shift was awful, if you did something for yourself, great, that's a win. Or it might be something fantastic, like, I sutured for the first time, or somebody I was looking after told me I was lovely to them, or my supervisor told me I was doing an amazing job, or I've learned so much. So it could be a tiny little thing, or it could be a big thing. Like for me, I had a really challenging shift on Saturday. I was in as bank staff. I got pulled to a different area. I got given 2 incredibly complex people to look after. I felt totally swamped. And I just made little lists all through the day. I made lists. I kept refreshing my lists. I kept rewriting them in nicer handwriting, made me feel good. And I had set myself a really low bar. And I said, if I can just tick off just these simple tasks on my list, then everyone will be safe. If I can also be lovely and smiley and friendly on top of that and make people feel good, bonus, but at least I will have given like a minimum standard of safe care. And I was proud of myself at the end of the day because, if nothing else, I was able to complete my list, and I really kind of cogitated on that as I was going home, I actually did really well today. I asked for help when I needed it, got help. And that is a practice. Like, I would not have always done that. So if you're not so much a sort of meditative type of person, sometimes even just like little notes like that to yourself of like, this is what worked today, so that when you are having a really rough shift, you can go back through your little notepad and go, oh, actually, even although I only had 1 good shift on every shift, that's 20 good things that happened to me over the last month. Or, keeping a file if you get like a nice card from somebody that you looked after, or a little note from the supervisor, any tiny scrap of success, like hold on to it, because that builds up, like that is cumulative over your career. And when you look back on it, that can help you give yourself a bit more compassion, even if you did have a bad day, made a mistake, inadvertently harmed somebody, stuff happens. You can look back and say, okay, well, the overwhelming evidence is to the contrary, that actually I'm doing a good job. But again, it takes practice. This is a skill. Here's me after 11 years in the job, and I need to still consciously say to myself, like, okay, what did you do today that actually really worked? Like, actually, you should be pretty proud of yourself because look how hard that was, kind of thing. And another thing maybe we can talk about, another skill that I found really important, and this comes up over and over and over again with people that I work with, is knowing how to set a good boundary between work and home. Siobhan's nodding yes. Or between placement or uni and home, because I think, again, as midwives, we're very prone to reflection, right? Reflective practice is part of what we have to do, but we kind of over reflect and ruminate and spiral about things that happened on our shift, things that did not go well. Let's face it, even at the best of times, midwifery has things that are going to be sad or not work out, or you're just not going to be able to do. So I think if we're looking now in the current environment at helping new midwives build a sustainable career for however long it's going to be, 10, 20, 30 odd years, that being able to switch off from work and consciously set a boundary between work and home, and know how to distance yourself from kind of work-related thoughts is a big one. What do you think, Siobhan? Is that something that you found in your time as well?
I find that incredibly challenging, really challenging.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
hard.
one that I would say that all the things are challenging, but that's the hardest, absolutely. But sometimes actually an external trigger will be the thing that makes you go, no, this time I need to use my no card. And you know what's really nice actually, to have like someone on your corner, whether it's just a friend who is there to go, I'm giving you permission to use one of your no cards. That's like not that long ago I had to say no to something, and it's not something I do often. But I looked at the bigger picture and I was like, I can't give everybody my best if I do this. I'm just gonna have to say no to this one. But then obviously then you start thinking about it and you're like, how is that? I'm letting people down. And I went to my friend and we had a discussion, and she said to me, Siobhan, I'm giving you permission to use one of your no cards. And that was enough for me to go, right, no, not. So sometimes you need someone else just to help you with that accountability, I think. Because had it been left in my own hands, I probably would have talked myself back into saying yes and then struggling with everything that was going on. So but then again, she said, like, I do the same for her. That's what happens when I'll say, like, this is you're getting a chance to use one of your no cards here. So I think that having friendships, and that can be within midwifery or without midwifery. It doesn't have to be she happens to be an student midwife, but it doesn't have to be. It can be anyone. I think just having somebody there that helps you with your accountability probably is a good step in that direction, because, like you say, when it's left to yourself to do it, it's really hard, it's really challenging. So like it's okay to accept help. It's always okay to accept help. But yeah, I would say that another thing that I've done that's helped a little bit, and this is, I suppose it depends on your kind of situation as to whether you can do this, is I try to go to a different room to do my midwifery things. Like, because obviously we do a lot of classes from home and stuff for uni. So to try and keep home and midwifery separate rather than sitting in the living room doing it, where I could be sitting and then I'll just continue over my lunch, and that's not really helpful. It's maybe an easier way to create a boundary, is just as well, right, well, actually I'm going to a different room to do that, so that I can come back to, like, living room or kitchen or whatever during a break, so that I can take that physical step away. So obviously everybody's in a different situation, and that's maybe not physically possible in where you are, but I think if you can even use it, even like when you're at uni or whatever, try and use the library, try and use like kind of on campus things if you need to, just to make that physical distance, because that tends to be my problem. If I've got it in front of me, I'll just keep working away at it as well. So this is definitely one of my biggest downfalls, like 100% my biggest downfall. And I have to work really, really hard at it, and I fail more often than I'm successful. But
yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I think it helps people to know that, you know, these are skills that we have to practice, even if we're aware of them and we know all the right things to do. If you're going to have a sustainable career in midwifery, with the way midwifery really is now, let's be honest, like these skills are as important as your clinical skills. You need to help yourself cultivate these habits of, you know, switching off or separating or whatever. So physical separation is obviously one good way if you're worried that you're just going to keep going over your uni work or whatever, you know, to like put it in a different place or do it in a different place. But also something I find really helpful in my discussions with other midwives and student midwives is like just setting a bit of mental difference from your shift when you finish. So creating like little rituals and routines that your brain will gradually learn, you know, this means I'm switching off, I'm done with work now. And this, again, be different for everybody. Like, so for some people, they might have a car or a bus journey home or whatever, and then they take the dog for a walk, you know, and that's like their little buffer. Or, you know, always light a candle when you come in, and that's kind of signals to your brain like, okay, this is a different space now. This is my home time. Or you listen to a certain song, or you go and do like a yoga thing for 5 minutes, or whatever is like your jam. I think it's quite important to like build in little rituals of separation between work and home life, especially if you've had a really rough shift. And it feels a bit hokey and a bit like forced at first, but our brains are very plastic, by which I mean like very like moldable. And if we practice these habits over and over again, eventually your brain does learn like, okay, this means it's switch off time. And another thing that's maybe worth mentioning about creating a bit of mental space between yourself and kind of worky thoughts is there's a technique that I learned that a lot of people I work with have found really helpful. It's from a form of therapy called ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's sort of a version of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, but slightly different tools. And this tool from ACT is called diffusion, and it's a way to sort of distance yourself from like very repetitive or sort of like not intrusive thoughts, but if you're ruminating about something that happened during your day, you know, like you've had a woman that you just can't stop thinking about what happened to that person, or you made a mistake at work. I mean, I can ruminate on like the silliest mistake for weeks at a time. I'm very skilled at that. So it's a sort of 3-step process. When you catch yourself thinking about this kind of spiraling thought. So let's say I'm thinking, I made a mistake at work. Okay, so that's the thought. I made a mistake. And all day long, I'm thinking, I made a mistake at work. I made a mistake at work. Then you create a bit of space by reframing it as, I'm thinking that I made a mistake at work. And then the next step in reframing is, I notice that I'm thinking that I made a mistake at work. So with each step, when you're reframing it in your mind, you're sort of reminding your brain to create a little bit of distance from the thought. So instead of you just being the thought, I made a mistake, I am a mistake, I'm a horrible midwife, you're thinking that you're a horrible midwife, you made a mistake, and then you notice that you're thinking. So you're sort of noticing that that is the thought that you're having, rather than just, oh my God, thought. If that makes sense. There's lots of information about it online for anybody who's interested. It's diffusion under ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. There are better explanations of it online, but a lot of the people that I've worked with individually, when we sort of dive into what that is, report back that they have found that really helpful. Because I think especially when you're fairly junior in your career or you're a student, even the tiniest error, or even if you didn't make an error, if it's just something that happened that affected you, can take up a lot of space in your head. So if you find that that's happening a lot on days off, this is just a helpful technique to just slightly distance yourself from that constant kind of intense spiral. So there you go, little something to try for those of us at any stage along the journey.
I like that. I think actually, just when you're saying the different stages of the journey, this is a conversation I have quite often with other students who are saying that they're really worried about going out into as a newly qualified, and they're really properly panicking about it, about they're going to go in and they're not going to know what to do. And quite often I'll say, like, have you ever seen a midwife who's been pulled, who's been in postnatal, for example, for 20 years, and she gets pulled into labour ward, and she'll go, I have no idea what I'm meant to be doing. or vice versa, somebody from labour ward goes into like antenatal community. Do you know, when you get pulled from the area that you're used to working in and the environment you're used to working in and methods that you're used to working in, it's always scary and it's always challenging. It doesn't matter how many years experience you've got. Yes, okay, as a newly qualified, you maybe have less knowledge, but I take comfort from that. The fact that I'm like, well, if you put one of the postnatal midwives in here, she would probably be asking me, what do you think about this? I was like, so that makes it okay. It normalises it again, I think. Not that we should be normalising feeling terrible at work at all, but at the same time, like that, not beating yourself up about not knowing everything and going into it and like you say, asking questions. Like I just ask questions all the time because I'm like, mainly because that's the way I learn. I need to understand to learn, and that's how I remember things. But also it creates a really safe culture. I think if you can ask questions and you are responded to with kindness and understanding, and then it means that then the next time that you're something you're a bit unsure about, you can ask again. And I think that the culture is hugely important when it comes to but we can create that. We can, like, you might go into somewhere the culture's not great, but you can always be the first person that takes that step to make it a nice culture. You know, you can be the person that makes it approachable. Because quite often I find that if you do that, others who might have been a bit indifferent will feel a bit like, oh, if she's doing that, I should probably do that too. Like, and then do you know what I mean? I think that kind of grows a wee bit. There'll always be people who don't. There'll always be the one or two. There always will be. But actually, if we can go in and develop that kind of culture, I think that's one of the biggest things that will help to retain new midwives in position is going in and having that really kind of safe culture where we can ask questions and we can feel okay to say, I don't really know this, can you show me? And then if there's something that you've never been sure about, you then show it to somebody else. Like, did you know this? Did you know that you could do it this way? Because I mean, I know, like, I'm sure you'll be aware as well, like Badger, for example, changes on a regular basis. Like, so there's always something new to be like, oh, can I help you with this? Can I show you that? So I think that culture's the big thing, isn't it? Really, essentially, when it comes to our well-being and our mental health, when it comes in, when we go out into like the kind of world of work. And we'll never change it in a day, but we can change it individually, like step by step.
Yeah, definitely. Culture is a massive thing, and it can be the difference between somebody staying in a post or leaving, or staying in midwifery and leaving. And that's just one last point I want to make before we maybe move over to the questions, is that a lot of people that I speak to reach a kind of crisis point in midwifery because they're maybe working in a place where the culture is not good. They feel very sort of stuck and trapped by that. And I think in the NHS, it's very easy for us to sort of get a bit blinkered in our lane and think, oh my God, this is the only option that's ever available to me. This job in this unit, this is the only place I've ever known, or this is more convenient for me, or whatever. And thinking like, well, if I can't hack it here, then that's me, I'm done as a midwife. And that may be true in some cases, but I think actually in a minority of cases, and I've seen now over the fullness of time, a lot of people who did feel incredibly stuck and trapped, having the courage and the sort of imagination and creativity and resourcefulness to make a move to a different clinical area, a different unit, maybe a different trust or whatever. And in many cases, feeling a lot happier and saying, I'm so glad I didn't just leave completely, because this is actually, the culture here is totally different. So I think I would say that as well to anybody who is feeling a bit trapped on a particularly rubbish placement or newly qualified. You know, if you find that the culture and the place you're working is not at all what's healthy for you, like there definitely are other options. It feels sometimes like you don't have that in the NHS, but if you think laterally enough and get support and kind of look around enough, there usually is at least another place you can try and see if that suits you better. So enough from me. I'm just looking over to the questions, and we have two that I think we've got three now. I'll answer the first one very quickly. So somebody's asking very kindly, do I still run workshops for MidSocs? I do, not as much as I used to, just because it's a little bit tricky for me to travel at the moment. it kind of depends where you are. If it's somewhere that I can get a train or a plane to easily, then potentially yes. But definitely you can DM me on Instagram. It's just at Leah Hazard. That's the easiest way probably. And let me know where you are and what you're interested in. I have done the workshop online. It is possible, but I just find that the engagement isn't quite the same. A lot of people don't put their camera on, or you can see people sort of like zoning out. And I feel because of the type of work that I do, it's much more kind of nourishing to have a face-to-face connection. But we can certainly discuss options, so that's lovely. Siobhan, do you want to look at the next question from, yeah, the link is in the chat to my Instagram.
I see it. So Rosie is saying that she's read a lot about student midwives really struggling with the stress of degree. Do I think this is an inherent part of the role, or do you think there's a lack of support for students? And if resources were unlimited, what would you like to see put in place for students to support them more? So, in answer to the first question, do I think it's an inherent part of the role, or do I think it's a lack of support for students? I think it's both. To be perfectly honest, I think it's both. And I think that, so many moons ago, I did a primary teaching degree up to a certain point and then I left. I think that any vocational degree is going to have that stress level attached because it was exactly the same for it in a completely different environment, exactly the same. So I think, yes, there is stress that comes with the degree, and that's okay because, as I say, stress isn't the bad thing, so we'll be able to deal with it. That's important. Do I think there's a lack of support for students? Yes, I do. I don't think it's horrific, but I do think there's always room for improvement. And if resources were unlimited, what would I see? Oh my goodness, well, that's a big question. I would have, if I had unlimited resources, I would have a member of staff from university and placement areas at all times. So that there's always somebody there that you can go back to as that link. I think they're looking at making changes at the moment. That doesn't happen at all, certainly where I am. And they're looking at making changes so that there will be staff back out in placement areas sometimes. But I think if you had unlimited resources, I would have somebody there the whole time because it's nice to have that wee contact and to be able to go back and forth and have, essentially it would be like a support, I suppose, like clinical supervision on tap. So in that moment when you're in an environment and something horrific has happened, like Leah said, it doesn't have to be that you've done anything wrong. It could just be that you've just witnessed something that you've never seen before that's really quite scary, that you've got somebody right there that you could go to and talk about it at the time rather than going away and thinking about it and ruminate without any kind of really good like outlet for that. So I think that I would love to see that. That would be amazing. Also, Rosie has come along to a few things at UWS. She knows that the societies are a big deal. I think if we could have unlimited funding for the society, I think there would be a whole load of things that they would be able to do to support students even more so than they do right now as well. And that's a big question, Eva, so I'm only giving you a wee tiny answer to it, but I don't know if you think there's anything that you can think of, Leah, that would...
I think those are great answers. I mean, that in a lot of ways, it's not the students or the unis that need to change, it's the whole system, when we, and I think that's true across society. If I can be a bit deep, it's so often not an individual problem, it's the general more infrastructure of the way the system works. I think what would be nice for students is absolutely everything that Siobhan said, but also a chance to have deeper, more regular interactions with more senior midwives in a non-supervisory context, whether it's like in a kind of buddy way or sort of informal mentoring kind of way. Because I feel like when you're a student or you're newly qualified, you do feel like you're being assessed all the time. In many ways, you are being assessed all the time. And so the contact that you have with more senior peers is always, there's like a power imbalance. There's always some element of like, can I be my real self, or do I have to be like perfect me, in order to sort of like have a rewarding interaction here. But I think what I find really helpful is for those at the start of their journey to have a chance to have, more honest, deeper discussions with people further on in their journey, in a non-assessment kind of context, so that we can support each other and we can exchange sort of tips and ideas and struggles and highs and lows. you know, like when I do workshops for students or events like this, or just talk to a student on an individual level, I know it's a cliche, but I actually think I probably get as much, if not more, out of that than the more junior person, because it makes me think, it invigorates me, makes me realize how far I've come, and that actually I'm still hanging in from when I was in that stage. So that's something I would like to see as well. And I guess that kind of ties into the last question, who's saying, "Yay, Siobhan, very reassuring to hear about your journey." So she says, "We hear the bad things about midwifery a lot, I think, and that is definitely true, especially in the media and sort of everything surrounding us. Can you share an example of something nice or positive that has stuck with you and that you remind yourself of when you're having a bad day?" And for me, I think it really is that I have to remind myself like how far I've come. And even if you're only, you know, halfway through first year, you've still come a long way since the beginning of first year. Or even if you're just newly qualified, how far have you come since you began your training? So for me, you know, when I have days like the other shift that I did, where I think like, oh gosh, like that was incredibly complex and unfamiliar and challenging for me, I think, well, actually, if I like wrote all that down on paper, just objectively about what I was managing, who I was looking after, what I was juggling, and how safe I kept everyone, like, that's amazing. Like, well done me. That's actually objectively phenomenal. So, you know, again, this is a learned thing that we have to do. And also, sometimes you just have to lower the bar for yourself, I would say. Like, sometimes if you finish your shift and just everyone was safe and everyone's alive, I know we sort of joke and say like, oh, well, nobody died. It was a good shift. Like legit, sometimes when you're a student or you're very junior, that's okay. If that's the bar that you can reach on that day, well done. You kept everyone safe. That is a massive achievement. And even for me now, when I have a really rough shift or like there are circumstances way beyond my control regarding staffing and lack of resources and stuff, sometimes all I can do is just make sure everyone is safe. Maybe I wasn't like the all singing, all dancing, amazing midwife, but if everybody was safe, that's my positive ending to the day. What would you say, Siobhan, to that question?
I've actually got lots. Like, so just the other day was my last shift if I was a student midwife. And I'll be honest, I didn't want it to end. I wanted it to just keep going. It was a night shift as well. I was like, I don't want to go home because I think at the beginning of your journey, you go out in first year and you go into placement and you're just overwhelmed by, I'm getting to do this. I'm actually getting to be part of these people's journey, and that's such a privilege. And then things weigh you down throughout the 3 years. Like you always will have good days and you'll always have bad days, but it tends to kind of wear a bit as time goes on. And I found that the last couple of shifts that I had, I savoured it again because I was like, I don't know when I'm going to get to do this again. So it becomes a wee bit like you sort of forget the privilege that you've got. Although you're aware of it, like you forget the kind of intensity of it. And I had the privilege in the last couple of shifts looking after a couple of lovely families. And on the last shift, one of the person I looked after had said, she's like, you're so patient. You're just so patient. Like, and I was like, you know, we put ourselves in a position where we actually go to work to watch people in pain. Like, what kind of person does that make me? I was like, actually, I just want to support you, and we supported her, and she had a beautiful wee baby, and she, I think when someone looks at you directly in the eyes and they say thank you, you know, they mean it from their heart. When it's like, I don't know how would I get through this day without you. That you can't, if you could bottle that, we would make a fortune. The feeling that leaves you with just does make up for so many ills. And I think that's the reason that midwives, even though all the challenges that are there, midwives keep turning up every day, because actually the privilege of being present for not just the births of babies, but just like, you know, before or after, you know, at any point in the midwifery journey, it's just such a privilege to be part of that journey. So I think that was a really positive way to end my shift. I happened to look after them the whole shift. They'd had the baby not long before the end, and I'd seen them basically to go up to postnatal ward. So I watched the whole, or I was there for the whole kind of episode of care, and that was a really positive thing that stuck with me, and that wee family will stay with me because that was the last family I looked after as a student. And all these wee feet up here, you can see behind me, every single one of them is a positive thing that I look at them and I think I was part of that journey. Like how lucky am I to have been part of that? So I think I'm not naive enough to say that it's everything's sweet and light and lovely. It's not, but there is a lot of goodness that happens at the same time, or we just wouldn't continue. We wouldn't want to be here. We wouldn't stay. There would be no midwives. So keep that in mind as well. That there is always positives. And like Leah says, even if it's a really weird, crazy shift, there'll be something good that happens during that shift. There'll always be some wee nice thing. It might not even be for you. It might be for one of your colleagues. They'll come in and say, "Oh, this happened," and you're like, "Oh, that's lovely." There's always a lot of positives as well.
Yeah, and one last thing, go for a walk on your break if you can, because sometimes if you're having a really, really awful day or it's chaotic and you feel like nothing good is happening, you'd be amazed how transformative just 10 minutes of fresh air is. And people think I'm weird because I do it, but I religiously do it and it makes a big difference. So there's another top tip. But that was great, Siobhan. Lots of excellent advice. And I think we're just coming up to 1:30. So am I right? We just winding up now?
Yes, we are. Thank you so much, Leah and Siobhan, for coming on today and being so open and talking about your experiences. I can't see any more questions. If anyone does want to get one in the last minute, please do feel free. Oh, I can see one's just come in right now. It's just a thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom. So thank you again. We will export today's recording and we'll send it to you via an email in the next week or so. Eventbrite is being a bit dodgy with us at the minute, so it'll come from an email from me. I'm also just going to quickly pop my email in the chat in case anyone wants to get in touch about the work that Doctors in Distress does. Do feel free to pop me an email. And I've also popped the link to our Eventbrite so you can go and see what other programs we're currently running. We also run a weekly Wednesday support group. It's open to any healthcare worker, clinical or non-clinical, but it's a safe, confidential space every week for you to just come and talk about thoughts, feelings, experiences with your peers. And that runs every Wednesday, so you can see that information on our Eventbrite page. And we will also be hosting a third midwife session towards the end of September. We're just ironing out the finer details, and then once they're confirmed, we'll send them over to you. But thank you so much again for attending. Leah, Siobhan, again, thank you so much for coming on to support this webinar, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much
for having us.
Bye everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye.